Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the Smart Up Podcast. Hey, it's amazing to see you again, and thank you for clicking on this podcast before anything else. Now, before we get right into it, I want to ask you a question right off the bat. Did you know that every day 1.5 billion people buy a can of Coca-Cola? Has that figure shocked you? Because it definitely has for me. I want to ask you a different question. This one is more personal to you, and it's going to make you think. What brand adds to your life? What brand has had an impact on your life? I bet you off the top of your head, you have no idea. And this is why in today's episode, I brought an amazing person that has worked in advertising, which has completely shifted my perspective on how I view sustainability in brands and the impact that they bring to my life. If that has sparked any of interest to you, make sure to listen to the end, because I promise you it will help you in terms of advertising if you're an executive, in terms of how you can help change the customers' journeys if you're a university student, who you can help, and your mission if you're a teenager, and generally make you think twice about the mindless decisions we make every day. Which is why, on today's episode, Thomas Kolster will break it down for you. And now here's a little more about Thomas Kolster. Thomas Kolster is a frontrunner and one of the most recognized thinkers globally where marketing, business, and sustainability meet. Kolster has written 2 books, Goodvertising in 2012 and The Hero Trap in 2020. With his first book, Kolster popularized the term Goodvertising to describe advertising delivering positive environmental or societal benefits. With his second book, he forewarned about a post-purpose market, where people don't buy your values or your why, but rather who you can help them become. He continuously challenges the status quo with his vocal and often provocative views on values, purpose, and leadership. Kolster is an international keynote speaker who has featured in over 80 countries for companies like Meta, Adidas, P&G, and IKEA, to conferences like TEDx, SWSW, and Advertising Week. As the founder of Goodvertising Agency, he advises Fortune 500 companies, startups, nonprofits, and governments on more creative strategic approaches to brand and business impact. His pen rarely rests as he writes for the likes of The Guardian, Ad Age, and Adweek. Monthly, Kolster joins Ad Age's podcast, Purpose Hits and Misses, taking a critical look at global purpose campaigns. Together with climate solutions platform We Don't Have Time, he runs a streaming show called Climate Punk, where he interviews diverse people in the climate space. Thomas continues to drive industry change through his active participation in leading forums such as the International Advertising Association Sustainability Council, DNAD's Impact Council, and Act Responsible. He helps to promote best practice as go-to judge of top award shows such as Cannes Lion and DNAD. Thomas is also an eager entrepreneur and has launched impact platforms such as Projector, Where Good Grows, and Impact Pimp because his belief is simple. Change begins with you. And now here's Thomas to tell us all about advertising and how the brands that you choose matter. Hi, Thomas. Thank you for being on the podcast.
So lovely. Thank you for letting me join you this wonderful Monday morning.
Sure. All right. Let's get right into it. I want to ask you, Thomas, can you define what advertising means to you? We started off big.
Yeah, I mean that has changed quite tremendously. Like from my early days to now. I mean, I never really went into advertising because I cared about advertising, and I think when I, in a pretty young age, wrote my first book, Goodvertising, the opening line was, "I hate 99.9% of advertising." So there you go.
All right.
That being said, I do think that an industry that spent about $1 trillion US to manipulate, to converse, to advertise to all of us out there comes with a tremendous challenge, but also a tremendous opportunity of using that voice and work for something better than it's being done today.
Thank you, Thomas, for that great start. Before we got on, I actually went ahead and looked at your YouTube channel and looked at a couple of events that you did. And I just wanted to say congratulations. Your work is something that inspires me. Now, I actually want to ask, while I was watching it, this question popped up. And it's for any teenagers and students listening to this right now, why would you recommend they choose advertising for their career?
But would I recommend that by the day? No, I think obviously our industry has changed tremendously. I think what I still love about advertising, it's an open space to be creative. So if you don't feel like going into necessarily art, so if you can't make a living out of art, I still do think that advertising is an open-minded space where you can try and have fun. You can make amazing 30-second commercials with some of the most amazing directors in the world. And I think you sort of get, it sounds weird, but I think you kind of understand how a business works, how a brand works. So if you start your years in advertising, you don't need to end your years advertising. People change jobs all the time. So I think the opportunity of young people today is just to get into a business that's fun, that's creative, and they might actually teach them a lot of things where then they might later go in and do their own business, and then they can hopefully create something that's much better than most of the brands that are out there today.
So it's a great starting point.
I think it is, honestly. I mean, I still lean back on it a lot. Obviously, I am still in the industry, at least one foot heavily planted there. But I really do think like it's a good starting point. And even though I didn't really feel like going into advertising because I thought there was a personal value clash, I'm still very appreciative towards the sort of skills that I've learned in all those years in advertising. And it's still fun.
Sorry?
And it's still fun.
Of course. Before you answered the question, you actually said that advertising takes you way back. Can we get to know your story behind how actually you ended up pursuing a career in advertising?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is good advice depending on what all our listeners are doing today, but I dropped out of university. So that wasn't
There you go, a bold statement.
Yeah. That wasn't popular with my parents for sure. But basically, I think I framed it around like I'm going to take a little sabbatical. I was working at a bar that was frequented by a lot of actors and movie makers and some advertising folks. And, I always loved writing, and that was sort of the thing that I did at the time. It was like everything from poems to novels to, creative stuff. And I didn't actually know too much about advertising. By chance, I was dating a girl whose mother was a copywriter, and I was so tired of university. And she was like, why don't you just try this world of advertising? And didn't know much about it. I read a book called Ogilvy and Advertising. Ogilvy is the guy, David Ogilvy, who founded the agency group Ogilvy, which is one of the big ones today. But this book is really old school. If you pick it up, what you will see was, I remember this one image where there was a photo from his castle, and there was a helicopter parked next to that castle. And I think this sort of description was something like, oh yes, and that is my helicopter. So I thought, okay, wait a moment, I can get a castle, I can get a helicopter, and I can write. And so, wow, I was in advertising suddenly. I knocked on the door, got in through a fictitious portfolio. So it was quite a spontaneous thing. And suddenly I was sitting there in a chair at an advertising agency.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just like that, that's how the rest of your career followed.
It was.
Actually,
I mean, it wasn't like, and that I think it's sometimes a good reminder to people who are listening today is that, there's so much stress in terms of what are you going to be,
yeah.
what direction should you be heading. And sometimes, I mean, my advice is like, just try and open that door, try it out for a little while. If you don't like it, shut it down, go somewhere else. It's like you are actually in the driver's seat. And that's sort of how I felt it at the time. And, I stuck around and I found my own little niche in advertising that I really do enjoy today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to dive deeper into the world of advertising. And you've said that your first book that you published, Goodvertising, you created this own word for you, which is Goodvertising, different from advertising. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means?
Yeah, it was actually this little heavy green thing here, and what happened was back in 2009. I'm from Denmark, and Denmark at that time was hosting the climate summit COP15. So we had all the elected government leaders there: Barack Obama, Tony Blair, Angela Merkel, all of those people who are not in politics anymore. But so as a Dane, I had a lot of high expectations to elected government leaders, and nothing much came out of that. So I felt extremely frustrated, and so what I started, just asking myself was, I'm in advertising. It's a pretty, strange career path in terms of me wanting to do something for climate because, advertising or consumption, all that stuff. But I asked myself the question, within that industry I'm in, what can I actually do? So I started writing this book called Goodvertising. Wrote the book called Goodvertising. The idea about Goodvertising was just saying, okay, advertising can be used for something more than just sort of selling. At that time, 2009, advertising was still pretty sexist. It was sort of playing a lot on status. So if you don't have this, you're not the cool kid in class and all that stuff. But at the same time, I thought, wait, advertising can also do something differently. So Dove is an example that some of you listeners might know, who obviously talks about sort of women empowerment and try to redefine what beauty is. Stuff that we today take for granted and given. But back in 2009, those were novel concepts. So that was sort of my contribution. And I think I wrote something along the lines that, whatever profession you're in, you can choose to get the best out of it and use your voice and work for something good. So that's what I wanted to try and do with advertising and hopefully inspire others to say, let's do better. I mean, just because we're advertising, we can still make a difference.
Sure. I completely agree. So is this where your inspiration came from? The COP15 summit and the adverts?
It was. I mean, I think it was twofold. I think definitely it was the anger, the frustration, the anxiety on the back of that, for sure, that sort of inspired me. I think sometimes, and I often talk about this, that a lot of good stuff can come out of hate.
Sure, yeah.
It might sound strange, but if you really want to hate, if you hate something so much, you want to change. And I think that was sort of what my starting point was as well. I was just like, geez, I got to do something. And then secondly, the thing was also I started seeing advertising I'd never seen before. Like I saw car advertisers talking about how they would put their cars on trains rather than on trucks. And I thought, I'd never actually seen that type of messaging before. Let me try and explore that and investigate that a little bit. So probably a mix of curiosity and hate.
Yeah. Sure. And your idea of entering yourself onto this mission of turning advertising into something that's more than selling, that's something that sticks to the watcher, the person behind the screen, must have brought up a lot of reactions, right? So my question is, what were the initial messages that you received from publishing such a book regarding the concept of Goodvertising?
I mean, honestly, I was a bit scared and anxious, to be honest. If you know, I was young at the time, and suddenly like being on a stage at an advertising conference in front of like much older people, much more experienced people. It was quite a like anxiety inducing effort in the beginning, because I kind of felt like, you know, hey, you know, what's my contribution? I remember one of the earlier reactions, which is probably something that's good for our listeners to know as well, was I remember this very highly respected creative director, and he just said to me like, "So Thomas, why are you at all sort of capable of writing a book like that?" And I was so shocked by his sort of question, because I thought we were in creativity. I thought, you know, we can just, you know, and I just answered like, because I want to. And so I think, quite frankly, I mean, in the beginning, I was facing a lot of sort of pushbacks and criticism, and you know, why this, and you know, advertising, if you don't like it, get out of it, you know, all that stuff. And again, I think something good comes out of resistance, because I just kept pushing.
That passion, that's real. Yeah.
And then people slowly started catching on to it. I mean, you know, in the beginning, there weren't a lot of advertising festivals, or for that sake, other conferences who invited me. Yeah. But one group of people who did welcome me with open arms was a lot of these early folks that worked in sustainability, corporate social responsibility, some climate folks who were like, finally, there's actually someone who talks about the power of communication to maybe inspire people to think differently about how they can live more sustainably. So they opened their arms, which was my new little tribe that I got welcomed into.
And that's how you built your community.
Yeah.
I actually want to fast forward a little bit now into your career to the point where you published your second book, The Hero Trap. My next question is, can you tell the listeners a little bit about this book, and how is it different from any other books on the topic of marketing?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think probably a lot of our listeners could recognize this, the frustration I had. So I think my second little light bulb moment with this book, The Hero Trap, let me just try and see if I can find it. Just there.
Beautiful cover.
Yeah, I'll talk to the cover a little bit. There's a really interesting story behind that one. But for me, I had two things again. I think one thing was actually I realized how difficult it was to live sustainably in my own life. It was shocking. I felt that, you know, even though I knew so much about the topic, like when you went down to your like local supermarket, etc., it just wasn't easy. So I felt frustrated about that, you know, more than a decade later, you know, not a lot had changed in that sense.
Despite all of the messages that we're trying to do so much and nothing. Yeah.
And secondly, I also felt that way too many brands just sort of went into this space and wasn't genuine and authentic about it, because suddenly like every brand talked about climate, about fair trade, about handmade, about community, There was so much like disingenuous efforts out there. And so I asked myself one question, which was, with all these brands, with all these sort of pretentious superhero, Mother Teresa, Gandhi type folks out there, Greta Thunberg type brands, what brand had in fact created real change in my life? And
that's a deep question to think about, even for myself.
Yeah, it's a good question to ask yourself, and even for the listeners to actually like put that out there and think about it, because, and so that led me to like think about this topic in a completely different way. So I really sort of put the human first, my own frustrations, my own challenges with changing my behaviors. And so I wanted to sort of create a new type of leadership. And and the best leaders I've had in my life were the ones who inspired me, who pushed me forward, who was that sort of coach that was just behind me. And I thought, why shouldn't brands be like that as well? Why, the brands that we choose, the brands that we invite into our lives. And so I started, and this might be good for those of you out there who might have your own little Instagram startup or whatever it might be, but a really good essential question to ask yourself is, who can you help your customers become? How can you help them on their change journey? So instead of going out and saying, oh, I got so inspired by seeing plastic in the beaches in Accra, Ghana, and now I have a new swimwear collection, blah, blah, blah. How can you translate that into something that's valuable for a customer, that's part of the customer's benefit? And so that's what I try to do with the Hero Trap, and sort of get brands to really focus on enabling change in you and my life on a daily basis, because I think that's hopefully how we can scale up the change faster.
I want to add on to that. When you look at a brand, what is the first thing that you look at? How impactful they are, or?
It's a good question. What is the first thing? I mean, for me, brands are like friends. And quite frankly, is this a friend I want to welcome into my little close circle of, and a lot of them aren't actually, right? I think a lot of them are just there because we're too lazy. We didn't really bother too much. So maybe we didn't question ourselves if Colgate is just the best toothpaste for us in this state of life. And I think that is also why advertising in so many ways work, right? I mean, imagine if you're in a foreign country and you don't read the language and you go into the store and you don't know the brands, and it's like a little bit of a weird thing because every little decision, what milk, what toothpaste, is quite a big
especially when you're traveling. Oh God, and you look at the whole row of different milks, which one is the best to choose? And for me, I don't know about you, but I just look at the one that looks the most legitimate in terms of packaging, which one looks the most appealing to the eye. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's probably also why some people, when they travel, go into McDonald's or Starbucks, because, wait a moment, I at least know that coffee. So a lot of it is just that sense of familiarity. And so for me, I think that's one of the key questions. It's really about how that brand sort of makes me feel and how it adds to my life. I think that's a key question. And then much further down, when it's about sustainability and climate and all these things, what is the real impact that brand is actually doing? Is it just fun marketing to attract a young audience, or is there actually some action behind it?
That's a question worth repeating. Yeah. What a brand adds to your life. Yeah. It's a perspective that I've never looked at before. I'm really speechless now. You got me thinking about everything I've bought and if it really adds value to my life.
But that is the problem, right? And that's also why it's really easy sometimes to point fingers at brands and say, are they doing enough? And shouldn't they be doing more about climate and empowerment and diversity and inclusion?
And if they care about their customers, or they're all about trying to scale their business, yeah.
Yeah, but by the end of the day, we're also lazy, right? So we also need to point a fat finger at ourselves and say, okay, there probably is quite a lot of brands that we invite into our home, into our life, that probably shouldn't be there because they aren't actually necessarily what we want and what we believe in. And so, that's why I use the friends analogy, because in an ideal world, obviously, we should be hanging around with brands that are sort of value aligned.
That's another interesting way to look at it, looking at brands as your friend.
Yeah.
And now I want to even get more narrow, where to the point where you discuss about this idea of a post-purpose market. Can you explain what this means and why it's a critical shift for brands?
Yeah, I mean, purpose is a bit of like a marketing word of saying, what sort of mission, what sort of burning passion does that brand have? And as I said, in terms of what provoked me to write The Hero Trap was in fact that I felt like suddenly every brand was on some sort of quest. I mean, just the other day I was walking in London and there was a new office building and it was like plastered with like green, carbon neutral, flowers, bees, all this stuff. And I'm like, but wait a moment. I mean, you're building a concrete office building that looks goddamn other concrete building. It's just like minimal effort you put into it, but you talk about it like you're saving the world. And that's what I absolutely hate. So I really feel that depending on where our listeners are today, to be honest, I mean, if you take sort of like a Northern European perspective, there's so many brands that talks about climate, diversity, and inclusion. Obviously, if you go more global south, we will pretty much still see a bit more of a conservative, status-driven advertising. That's much closer to the advertising that I grew up with in the sort of 90s, early 2000s. So it obviously depends, but post-purpose for me is about what to do when every brand is talking about climate, diversity, and inclusion. How do you then really matter? And again, for me, the brands that actually really push you forward, that make you think about things like Oatly, for example, the oat milk brand. When they go out there, they provoke us to think. They challenge advertising. They challenge our habits about drinking milk. Sorry. And they say, wait a moment, why don't we drink oat milk? It's better for the climate. And plant-based is probably a really, really good way of cutting down on those carbon emissions. So in that way, they help us on that journey, and they inspire us to sort of think about what brands we want to invite in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you see this shift impacting the future of advertising and brand strategy?
I think there's a lot of conversations around this at the moment in the advertising industry, for sure, and even in the world of agencies. I mean, when I started my mission, I mean, there was a handful of agencies who did this type of work. Today, there are tons. So anybody who's like listening to this today, I mean, if you want to go into the industry, you can look at an agency even that are value aligned, that want to do work for companies that might be only focusing on companies that drive impact, that has a social angle, etc. So that a lot has changed since my days in advertising, which is amazing, right? I mean, we should be happy about that. And also on brand side, I mean, there are brands out there that obviously do walk the talk. And another thing is also like these are not like easy challenges. I mean, you know, if you look at the average Dane's climate footprint, it's 13 tons, and just to sort of put that into perspective, we need to reach 2.5 tons. So, you know, imagine you were weighing 600 kilos and you had to reach 100 kilos. It's a heavy diet we need to get on, and so we need all people on deck to kind of succeed with this, and we really need to think about how and what brands we want to collaborate with and invite in as our fun friends towards combating climate, the climate emergency.
This is definitely a very big, challenge that we're aiming to get to. Do you think with all of this advertising that's changing from selling to reaching to the customer, that it will actually be easier to become more sustainable as it really comes down to trends or fashion, as easy as that, to change a person from drinking regular milk to plant-based milk?
Honestly, it's incredibly tough. And I mean, I sometimes feel frustrated about having dedicated so much of my life to this and still seeing so little change. I mean, it's a two-way street. I mean, we also got to take a little bit of responsibility on ourselves and say, am I doing enough? And think about the brands that, I want to have in my life and who's doing what, and, think about also moving beyond tokenism. I mean, it's not just about a plastic bag. It's much, much, much bigger than that. I mean, it is really about sort of what bank do you have? What does that bank invest in? You know, do they invest in oil? Maybe not a good idea. You know, do they support a green renewable transition? Amazing. You know, maybe that's where you want to put your money. So it really has some pretty fundamental questions of all of us. And the problem is, in our busy day today, where we might want to go party on a Friday or Saturday, you know, do we really have time to ask ourselves all these questions all the time? So I think hopefully we will be seeing a much more transparent and easier way for all of us to act on it. I mean, a good example of that is, even though it's super boring and it's like, but actually the energy label, which some of you might know, which goes from like A plus to B to C, or like TVs, etc. I mean, that's a little guidance. It's not like a big revolution, but at least it makes it transparent and makes the brand mean less. Because if you were to choose between a Samsung TV or Philips TV and you see that one is more environmentally friendly, maybe that is actually where you wanna make that choice. But it's so difficult. And I mean, working in advertising and talking about these things are kind of being at a weapons conference and pitching peace, right? It's not a very easy fit between working in an industry that pushes oil consumption and talking about climate. It's a very fine balance. And I sometimes feel frustrated. I mean, last year I created this show called Climate Punk because I felt enough talking to advertising people. I wanted to talk to a lot of diverse people and actually understand what motivated them to create change and what motivated them to like stand up for climate.
I want to rewind you to something that you said about how it can be traced back all the way to banks and how if they are investing in oil or in something more sustainable. Really, I think I need to emphasize this because while you were talking to me about sustainability, I only thought the small picture, really what I buy and the brand. But now you made me aware that it can be linked all the way back to really your credit, where you get your debit cards, your credit cards, and a much, much bigger picture that you might not actually think about. So that's something that I just wanted to state.
Yeah, I'm happy you stress that, because I think like at a time where, as I said, the tokenism that, you know, should I be taking takeaway coffee in my cup, or should I bring a refillable mug or whatever, which is important. Those small actions does matter, of course, but on a much bigger scale, the other things are actually much more important, because if we really want to change this, we need to follow the money. And where do we spend the money? What are the institutions that we want us to represent? And again, like every time you buy something, it's a vote for a model that you believe in, for a company that you believe in. Kind of like when you vote, and voting is obviously also a really, really, really important thing. I know it's so boring to talk about because I'm so often
Actually, you're right in the heat, because I think this week is election week in Romania right now. So you're right on spot.
That's good. And EU elections and all this stuff coming up, I think a lot of young people take democracy for given. I mean, I've been coming to Romania for years. And I think when you look at Ceausescu's palace, it should give you a pretty big reminder of why democracy actually truly matters. And when you look to other states such as Russia and China or Zimbabwe or Venezuela, we do actually, freedom and democracy is not something we can take for granted. And it's not easy. Like it's like when you do group work in school or university, you might not agree with your group all the time, but you know that report needs to be delivered at the end of this little project. And that's kind of how democracy works as well. The politicians might not agree. We might not agree about what direction Romania should take, but you need to chip in and vote to sort of steer that direction, especially young people, because I mean, don't let old dinosaurs run the world stuck on their conservative ways and their diesel cars and their oil cars. Young people are the best ones to actually choose what direction this should take, because I mean, sustainability, what is it really? I mean, it's really about sort of sustaining a good life for generations. So it's like about the ability to sustain, to keep going on. And I think that's a good little reminder for people.
For sure. Yeah. So vote.
So vote, always
because
vote.
your vote matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thomas, now I want to take you away from this and go to a more work-related topic. I've noticed that you have this recurring pattern in your work ethic. And this pattern is emphasizing the importance of how brands can help their customers become their best.
Yeah.
How do you use this to influence and motivate your work?
Yeah, I mean, I even use it in my own work. I mean, when I started writing the second book, I sort of started asking myself, I mean, what is really the mission that I am on? And I actually realized that what sort of makes me happy and inspires me is when I can inspire others to go in a more positive direction and actually use their voice and work for good. That actually what's keep me up at night. So when somebody writes me on Instagram or whatever and says, hey, thank you, you inspired me, you made me think twice about my work or my career, whatever, that's what keeps me going when work sometimes sucks, you know, or you're stuck in a one-night fight or whatever. You know, I think fundamentally this is about understanding how brands, how the industry can make it easier for all of us to make that sustainable choice. For me, that's so pivotal. If the brand can empower us, enable us, I think this is what's key. So even if a brand has like also shitty products in its portfolio, how can it maybe at least just give us a slightly better version of that thingy? How can it inspire us maybe to try plant-based? How can it inspire us to maybe instead of going in a car, maybe embrace public transportation, look at advertising? I mean, what we see matters because quite often we copy other people. I think we sort of know that sentence. Even if I was in this Zoom call and started sitting like this, after a while you might even copy me. Yeah, exactly. And so we do that, and that's an old advertising tactic. And so if a brand that's selling shampoo show a lead actor driving in a car, why? They shouldn't do that. You know, why isn't the lead actor driving a bicycle? Because that's actually the real sustainable choice. On a bus, let's make the bus cool, make public transportation cool. And so these things matter, and that's why a lot of this sort of indirect messaging for me is so crucial. And it's also important, I think, for our listeners to actually think about these things and actually demand for brands to stop influencing us with all these things. Because, I mean, I grew up with advertising, as I said, that was sexist, degrading, preying on people that if you didn't have this or that, you weren't cool. And I know a lot of that stuff is happening in Romania as well, with, big luxury brands entering into the market and saying, buy this to feel cool. Or, and I think it's important we question those tactics, or at least are very aware about what those brands are trying to do, because is it actually really that cool to let yourself influence by, by an industry, unless it's aligned with your values? And I think that's what it comes down to by the end of the day.
Definitely.
Yeah, you are what you eat, but you are also sort of what you wear and what brands you sort of surround yourself with.
Thomas, as someone who advises Fortune 500 companies and startups alike, what difference do you see in their approaches when it comes to marketing?
A big, what is a Fortune 500 company? Those are the most sort of valuable companies in the world. Those are the Procter & Gamble that owns so many different products like Persil and others. it's like an oil tanker. Like, it's so difficult to change course. These are like massive companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, turnovers of billions of dollars. It does matter what they do, even in a smaller scale, because if they take these decisions, it touches a lot of people. Like, every day, 1.5 billion people actually hold on to a Coca-Cola product. So there's a lot of power and influence in that. So
1.5 million.
Yeah, billion.
Billion.
Oh, yeah. Every day. So it's a big business, and so advertising matters. And then I think so we just need to be aware of that, and I think that's important.
I want to actually take you back to the Climate Punk show that you mentioned, and it addresses diverse issues regarding sustainability and the climate. What have been some of the most surprising or impactful insights from your interviews on the show?
I've honestly, hands down, I learned so much on this journey. I love it. It's not,
That's great.
I'm always looking forward to it. And I can sense that you also enjoy your podcast. And I think it's just so important that, it just brings joy. I think, I've had conversations with Chris Jordan, for example. He's a photographic artist, and back in 2006, he was one of the first that documented ocean plastics, and he did that by taking these sort of stunning images of an albatross, a dead albatross that has suffocated in plastic. So its stomach was full of plastic, and these images were just like eye-opening and shocking. But when I spoke with him recently, he said to me he dedicated his life to this type of activism. But then suddenly he started taking some different photos, and I couldn't really understand what those photos was, because they were these beautiful, he lives in southern Chile now, these beautiful images of the southern Chilean landscape. And so I asked him, so what's the bigger mission behind this? And he said, I tried to kind of shout at people, shock them, try and get them to act. And then I thought, maybe my approach is wrong. Mm-hmm. Maybe what I need to do is make people fall in love with nature and fall in love with planet Earth, and maybe then they want to protect it. So for me, that was one very, very beautiful thought that he left me with. But I feel there's been so many amazing stories from everything from models, reality stars, chefs, to even I interviewed Melissa, who sits at the Climate Emergency Fund that finances Extinction Rebellion, Stop Oil, and a lot of these organizations. And she actually really talked about how just a few individuals who stand up and act can make a massive difference. And she talked about how in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, how a group of people actually got private jets banned in that airport. Just a few people who act, very, very little budget. And I think this really speaks truth to we as individuals and what we decide to do with our lives actually truly matter. And I think that's what brings me the most joy out of that show. It is actually remind ourselves that, as I said in the beginning of my career, we choose what doors we want to open. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of exciting doors we can open, but we can also sometimes, unfortunately, be heading towards a bit of a dead end that doesn't inspire us and it doesn't create change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's great to link back again to something that you said, to surround yourself with people, teachers, whatever it may be, that make you pause and think what this person is saying, or the actions or the projects that this person is doing really is inspiring and makes you stop and think. That's something that's very rare and very powerful. Even whether it's in marketing for brands or whether it's for maybe a teacher teaching you Spanish, whatever it may be, it's people that can trigger inspiration for something that you'll do later in life. I just wanted to add on to what you've said.
I think it's a good point. I think some of the best decisions I've made in my life, it sounds strange, when I dropped out of university and I had a period where I could think, I got sacked from an agency, kicked out. And that was probably one of the best times in my life because that also asked some pretty serious questions. I think there's so many things we do in our daily lives without actually taking that break. One thing I tend to do is at least once a year, I go away by myself and I sit for a couple of days just with a little notepad and a pen and just sort of write down, am I on the right path? What could I be doing better in my life? Does this still inspire me? All these things. And I'd really encourage everybody to do that. It's kind of like, when we were young then, some of you might have been writing a diary and, we can laugh at it, but it is actually a really powerful tool to transform and to make you sharper and to make you more value aligned and ultimately to get what you want. Because
definitely.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, might be thinking about, do I earn enough money or all this stuff, or what career should I choose? But I think a lot of that is just answered if you find what you actually really like doing, and then the rest will come.
I want to scale you on a broader term and use how people view you and how people inspire you to link you to the question about what trends have you noticed in the entries. I mean, you've judged top award shows like Cannes, Lyon, and DA and AD. What trends have you noticed in the entries over the years when talking about purpose-driven campaigns?
Yeah, a lot of stuff have changed. I mean, obviously it sounds crazy, but back in 2012, when the white pencils for the D&AD was inaugurated, a lot of that stuff was, sort of the early journey of my work as well. So we are seeing more and more of this work. And for at least some of the young people who are in this industry, there's so many ways where you can actually excel and do really well. I mean, D&AD have a category called future impact. So if you're running around and you have an idea about how things could be done better in the sustainable space, you can enter that, and that can be like a career transforming experience if you win that award. So I'll really encourage you to look at that. And also for people who think, is this industry really for me? You might not be fortunate enough to come from the right families. You might not be able to afford stuff like that. But again, D&AD have a program called Shift, which is for people from less fortunate backgrounds. So there are a lot of that stuff happening now in the industry. But back to the trends. Yeah, I think one of the big trends at the moment is basically to look more at this stuff as sort of design. So
the visual appeal.
No, more as like, how do you design better products that create an impact? I mean, one of the winners of this year was helmet made out of seashells. So you take something, you start thinking circular about things, so materials that would go to waste or materials that are abundantly available. How can you turn that into products? I did have something like that as well when I was jury president at D&AD some years ago, where we gave a white pencil, one of the highest accolades, to a campaign that created vegan leather. So they took the leftovers from banana fields that would normally be maybe burned, and then they turned that into leather, or a leather substitute. So right now, instead of running around with a handbag that's made out of cow, which is not a great idea to do, then at least you now have a pretty powerful alternative. So there's a lot of this sort of design thinking in how can we design things better that obviously delivers very, very easily an impact. So that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing. I see a lot more around empowerment. So how can you help facilitate choice? So for example, in the US, where you might want to sort of support Black-owned businesses or female-owned businesses. How can you create tools for that in advertising that does that and delivers on that? And so there's so many of these things that are, like, I feel important in our industry and sort of trends. So one is definitely empowerment and designing better that I'm witnessing right now. So those are two important.
Design and empowerment, yeah. And innovative ideas are usually the projects that spur up the most interest because it's something so original, so authentic, that's never been seen before. And so it sparks curiosity. And
you're absolutely right. I think, when I started in advertising, I mean, it was print, it was radio, it was TV. That was what was there. I mean, it's such an, as I said in the beginning, advertising is still fun. Because today advertising can be everything and
everywhere.
You can invent a new product. You can rethink packaging. You could rethink how we operate in cities. And let me give you one good example of a company called. So it was two Swedish guys who created this project called Åland Index. And basically, what they did was that every time you used your credit card, you'd also get a carbon estimate. So an estimate of the carbon emissions allocated to how you spend that credit card.
Really?
Yeah, super amazing. So that way it can sort of make you think when you get your bank card statement about how much you weigh on that 13-ton scale that I talked about.
Wow.
But even more so, they now have created a company. Remember, they started as advertising creatives. They started a company called Duconomy that does that helps banks do that. And just yesterday, or a couple of days ago, I saw Matthias and Johan, who is some of the co-founders and some of the creative geniuses behind that, just got a Series B funding of 32 million euros. So now it's the big stuff.
Congratulations to them.
Exactly, yeah. Congrats, Matthias and Johan. But really, it really shows that advertising is a really sort of good breeding ground for stuff like that. And so if you have entrepreneurial thoughts or want to go in that, there's still a lot of room to play. And maybe you want to start your early years there, and maybe you end up sitting in the shoes of Johan and Matthias and getting some good funding in there and creating a company that makes a difference.
Again, with that innovative characteristic.
Exactly. Much bigger than a print ad, much bigger. Yeah.
You believe that change begins with you.
Yeah.
For teenagers and students listening to this podcast, what practical steps can they take to drive positive change in their communities or future workplaces?
Yeah, I think first of all, don't take no for an answer. You will meet resistance through your whole life. Your idea about something or career choice or whatever might meet resistance. I've seen that through my whole life. My parents hated me going into advertising when I wrote my first book. The industry hated what I was talking about. Just keep sort of believing in yourself and that path, and
people will follow your values.
Yeah, keep going at it. Why do we get fascinated by someone like Greta Thunberg? It's just because she keeps going at it, right? She sat in front of that school freezing her butt off, but she kept doing it, and then more people follow, and so I think that's really, really helpful advice. And then I really also do think that passion is just so important, but everybody talks about it. But it's so difficult when you're young. As I said, I didn't have a clue about where I wanted to go. I honestly didn't. And so if you haven't found your passion in life right now, that's absolutely fine. If you don't know whether you want to be a doctor or work in advertising, that's absolutely fine. Just try and experiment a little bit, and you might really get surprised. I hated advertising, and to be
Look
honest,
where you're at now.
Exactly, and it's kind of fun, and I've created my own little way of doing it, and so I think that's a good reminder, because I think there's so much pressure on young people today in terms of, should you be joining a startup? Don't you already have a company? Don't you have an Instagram with like 10,000 followers? Then you're like a dropout, right? And I think it's taking a lot of that pressure off yourself, and then just do what you feel like doing. don't worry too much about it. Anybody else?
If you love what you do, then surely something good will come out of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't know what you love doing right now, then just go and explore and have fun. You know?
Don't take no for an answer and go out and explore. Yeah, I completely agree. Do you have any stories, actually, of people who have successfully initiated change based on your principles?
There's tons of people. I mean, you know, when I spoke about hate earlier, for example, there's a lot of people who like hate stuff and then really fundamentally want to change it. And so that's also why I sort of, you know, initially went on this sort of climate punk journey with the show, because I wanted to understand other people's motivations. And I met so many different ones. I mean, one of the world's first zero waste restaurant, the Silo, was created by a chef who just was super curious about how he could achieve this. So it's driven by curiosity and creativity to sort of achieve this mission. So I think there's a lot of sort of answers to how we can create change. I mean, as I said, one of the other ones I spoke to was a male model, your classic male model, and a TV reality contestant called Brett Stanleyland. And when he got onto the show Love Island, he was just thinking, why would I dress myself in fast fashion? I absolutely hate it. So he's one of the first guys who ever said no to those types of sponsorships and said, you can kick me out of the show, but I'm going to rock up in my secondhand clothes if you want it or not. And I think that's sort of the stuff that inspires me. And also sometimes the thing is, you know, share with the world. I mean, one of the stories I share in the book is this story about a young design student out of Amsterdam called Dave Hackens. And so he absolutely hated the very wasteful ways that phones are made. So he thought, what if I create a modular phone that's kind of like Lego bricks? So instead of, you know, every year you buy a new phone to get a better camera, why can't you just change the camera component? Or if the battery isn't working, why can't you change the battery? Or if this, you know, so he created this modular phone called Phone Blocks. And he actually didn't create the phone, because the only thing he did was he launched a YouTube video where he talks about the product, and it got like millions of views. And he ended up getting contacted by Google and Motorola to work on that project. He's also created another project called Plastic Chain. So sometimes it's really about, you know, sharing your project, sharing your vision, keep believing in, and then other people might join in there. And that's the power of communication, and that's the power of, I feel, inspiration and empowerment.
Definitely. Thomas, you talked to me about the importance of brands and their impact, the sustainability aspect of it all, and about the climate punk show that really inspired you. My question is now, putting you on the pedestal here, what's your favorite part about your work, about what you do?
Wow. Yeah.
So many things.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I really love is, you know, meeting with people, inspiring people, you know, exchange with people. I mean, I've always tried to like be curious, and so if I get an invite to go to Burma or Romania or wherever it is, I usually always say, hell yeah, of course I want to do that, because I want to learn, you know.
And since you're in advertising, sorry to pause you here, is it interacting with new people gives you new inspiration that you can use for your own work and see, oh, right, I can take it into this direction? So it's like a constant growth.
It's a constant growth phase. I mean, I couldn't be writing the stuff I did if I wasn't as lucky as to meet so many inspiring people on my travels. And I think also for young people who go into advertising is, don't just look at advertising. It's not going to make you more creative at all. Yeah. Go out there in real life, talk to people who you might not be agreeing with. If you work on a brief, be really curious about it, go there, explore that, go into that supermarket. I mean, I've been in townships in Mozambique to try and understand how it is to use a dry toilet that uses no running water. You go in there, you see that hole in the ground, you talk with those women and try and understand the situation they're in. And I think that's really, really essential. And especially because advertising and also media today tries to portray our world as black and white. Something is evil, something is good. The world isn't like that,
Much more complicated. Yeah.
It is much more complicated. The truth is somewhere in the gray zone. So I think the one best skill to have is this critical thinking and keep asking questions is super pivotal. But for me, I think, generally like it's going out there, experiencing new things, meeting new people, having new fun conversations, and even get myself challenged. Because
why not?
Yeah, by the end of the day, it's okay to disagree. We don't all have to agree, and when we disagree, something new comes out of that, and that's amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thomas, as any parting advice for young listeners just starting out their careers, what would you want to leave them with?
I think in this day and time, just don't worry, have fun, try things, open those doors. Don't stress about where you're at, where you're going to end up and all that stuff.
Take those opportunities.
Yeah, take those opportunities. And secondly, I mean, don't be blind and lazy and just sit down. I mean, by the end of the day, you are the one who create your life. And so, as I said, and you reminded as well, I mean, take those breaks, think about where you want to go, because
maybe take a couple of days off and take a pen and paper, as you said, and write your thoughts down.
Exactly. Life is like, it's a bit like, if you want to go somewhere and you look at a map, if you don't have an idea about the destination, you're going to get lost. You're never going to find it. And I think sometimes, it's good to get lost and then enjoy that. But I think if you really want to achieve something, it is good to sort of set up that goal and say, hey, I want to actually go in this direction. I think for me, I was in advertising and I wanted to be in advertising and yet still make a difference. And so I carved out that niche for myself, and I can go to work at least with a little bit better conscience than I could if I'd just been sort of pulled behind a machine where it's just about selling more stuff. So I think really like get lost, but also sometimes set that destination, because that makes sure that you find what it is that you really want to find.
There it is, your call to action. Yeah. Thank you, Thomas, for this very insightful conversation. I definitely learned, you broadened my perspective. Now I'm going to go away and talk to my mom and my dad about debit cards and the impact of the banks that we choose. But that was a very insightful conversation that I think a lot of our listeners now are going to go away and think about the brands that they choose, the design of a couple of things. If they had like a very controversial or innovative thing that they wanted to do, but were sort of ambiguous as to starting their career because they might be judged, now they might go off and be, this was what I had to listen to, and now I'm going to go ahead and do it. So
yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's none of these things are easy, and working in advertising is not easy, but it's not easy to be a creative, and you will keep doubting yourself through your whole career. But it also demands a little bit of bravery, to be honest, because else you might as well just go and work at a bank.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for agreeing to this opportunity, and I hope you have a fantastic week ahead of you.
Thank you, and best of luck on everybody's journey out there. Maybe
your future.
See yourself somewhere out there. I think I'm actually going to be in Romania for a climate conference sometime in October, November. I will double check that. But so we'll be in Romania in autumn. So maybe a possibility to see all of you there.
Great. Good luck with everything that you've got going on. Thank you for today, and have a fantastic week. See you. Bye-bye. Don't take no for an answer. Don't worry. The point is to get lost and set the destination. You want to go from point A to point B, having a goal in mind, but exploring on the way. I want to know that this episode meant a lot for you. And I want to stress the brands that you use. Thomas Kolster open up our mind to the bigger picture. And I'd like to thank him one more time. And I hope that this episode meant a lot for you as well. And also, I'd like to ask you a favor right before you go off. If this episode left you thinking, or it sparked curiosity, or it shifted your perspective, it would mean so much to me if you could please share it with your friends and family or anyone that's interested about getting to know more about brands or is interested in advertising. And leave a 5-star review, because sharing these episodes is what helps us continue bringing valuable content and amazing guests to you. And if no one tells you today, I want to be the first that says, I believe in you and your ability to make the dream life a reality. Remember, it's all about consistency, and one step a day will lead you closer to your ideal life. Have an amazing week. See ya.